Okay, we are here today with Jordan Davis, my good friend. I'm really happy to have you. This is fun. We've never really had a chance to do something like this, but I've had a lot of good conversations, so I'm excited to have you.
I'm really excited to have the conversation. Thanks for inviting me to be on.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's kind of follow the format that we have been here at Gravity. And I think it's kind of fun for me too, because I don't know this part of your story. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your family, your kind of early childhood, and kind of all the fun stuff that happened early on.
Yeah, well, I would say my story is, unique because every story is unique, but I think really relatable. I was born and raised in Westerville, which is a suburb of Columbus. My parents are still together. They went to kindergarten together. And they are born and raised in Westerville. We all went to the same high school. And the DNA of being a part of a community was a part of my life from as early as I can remember. My grandfather was the mayor of Westerville, the longest serving mayor, a lawyer. My mom runs the Westerville Chamber. My dad, a long-time Rotarian, works in healthcare, taking care of people. And it was just always what we did was community service, helping out at things, volunteering for things. And so I was an involved kid my entire life. And I remember, in middle school, kind of stepping out into my own space in school leadership for the first time, and very defining. And I kind of always had an appreciation for how the community works. Like, I think I have a unique ability to think about things at a systems level and kind of the intersection between things. And while I was coming of age, Westerville, the community I grew up in, was equally coming of age. And some really key, I think, economic and societal events happened that I think shaped a lot of what I was exposed to, the level of diversity of thought and ideas that have made me who I am. When I was in middle school, the community was growing significantly. And we had added new middle schools, and we had added a third high school in our community. And as a result, it continually fractured my friend group because we were constantly redistricting districts. And so I went to a middle school that only 10 of us actually went to the same high school that I did. And then once I was done with my first year, the third high school opened. And so my freshman class cut in half. And I stayed in my school. Simultaneously, the Somali refugee migration was happening. And so Westerville had the second largest population of Somali residents in the United States that moved while I was going to school. And so we went from one class of English second language students to 8 periods of English second language students. And my school was a collision of different things. And I remember my freshman year was very difficult for me in high school. It had broken my friend groups pretty much entirely, threw me into high school. I'd gotten really distracted from my academics. I was diagnosed with an attention disorder that was, in the end, very helpful, but at the time, very clearly an issue. And as a result, I was like failing in grades and not doing great, and lost a friend and who died from a very bizarre disease. So like my freshman year was a huge crucible moment. And I remember my sophomore year, a principal arrived to town. And also I should share, like, the cultural dynamics of my high school were quite unique. We had fights like every day. We went on lockdown 3 times because of gang fights and guns and all types of really interesting dynamics were going on in our community at the time. And so when sophomore year and we had kind of split the schools, a new principal came in simultaneously. His name was Keith Bell. And I remember for some reason, that first day we had like State of the Wildcat my sophomore year, and he kind of comes in like, okay, here's the new orders. There's no open lunch. There's, all of these new rules. We're going to clean up the school. We're going to, this isn't about bad behavior and all this stuff. And I remember I almost like facetiously at the end of the like talk, I went up and introduced myself. I said, hey, I'm Jordan. Good to meet you. Glad you're here. And I get called down to the principal's office, like third period. And that like changed my story forever. He gave me responsibility to help change the culture in our school. And from there, I became kind of his trusted student partner. And I got to get a taste of being an entrepreneur in a community space. So starting different clubs and organizations and initiatives that helped turn the attention in the school away from, the bad behavior and the fights and all of this like activity that was going on towards what makes going to school great, like academic performance and pride and all of these things. And
Jordan, let me just hop in for a second. So, because I want to back up, you had said a lot that really was intriguing to me, and you're starting to talk about kind of the emergence of leadership, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you to be somebody that is a really strong leader, and I've seen you really at a kind of a young age take on some serious responsibility in this community. And I was curious about kind of how that came to be and if you were just kind of wired that way. And so I kind of want to go back to the early parts. It's funny because your story so far reminds me a lot of a mutual friend of ours, Doug Ullman. And Doug, when he was on the podcast, he shared also that he had parents that were very loving, had been with each other a long time, still married, and also very community minded. Mm-hmm. And so, oftentimes what happens as we kind of dig back into these stories is there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of challenge, there's divorce, there's abuse, there's molestation. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that does happen to people. But what also happens to people is really loving, unconditionally loving, supportive, healthy families. Mm-hmm. And, I also want to, highlight that when I hear it.
It's okay. Right.
Yes. It's not only okay, it's like, that's the goal,
Right,
so
right.
Good for your parents and awesome for you.
Jim and Janet are great. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And you got this kind of role modeling and this environment that, really allowed for you to, I don't know. And that's what I guess I want to ask you, is like, how much at an early age did you know that you were living in an environment that, supported you or elevated you or gave you confidence? I mean, tell me a little bit more of what it was like to live in that family life.
Tremendously influential, right? I think the role also of my mother is incredibly shaping for me. So my mom was a working mom outside the home, and she had a job that wasn't 9 to 5. She had community events at night. We were always on. We only went to Westerville chamber member businesses. Like every part of our life had something to do with her career and what her life mission was. And I learned that, and I helped her in that. And so and like little things along the way, right? Like how we picked up phones at home was professional development. How I learned how to shake a hand and introduce myself was professional development. And those are all things that my mom was very assertive of teaching me. And I think as a woman, like that, she modeled the way for me. And so much of who I am is inspired by those foundational like values of professionalism, of like building reputation, relationship building, but also more notably between both my father and my mother is this belief that we're here to serve others. We have to give our lives to help other people. And I think that commitment to service, whether it's my dad in healthcare or my mom in community work, was absolutely like a calling of the DNA for me as well. And I mean, what's so interesting is even with the best parents, right? You're always going to be confronted with challenge, but I think they teach you the values of how to respond in that challenge. And so for me, my challenge in coming of age was death. Like I had a friend die every year from when I was in ninth grade until a sophomore in college. I mean, a close friend, like a boyfriend, a first kiss, like close friend. And that was incredibly traumatic for me, but I figured out how to make it productive through community organizing, because that's what I saw in my parents, right? I saw my parents play a role bringing community together, and I thought, okay, this is a way I can respond.
So, first of all, the role modeling you got from your mother, this kind of shake a hand and how you answer the phone, was that at all kind of like feel like it was like pressure filled or like tough to kind of, have to be a little more adult or mature, or I mean, listen, I think it's also really amazing for kids to learn that, but I think it's sometimes, depends on how you're learning it, it can be hard for kids too.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that way?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. There's complexes for days in the pressure, right? Mm-hmm. And the expectations. And I know my brother feels it too, but I almost think it's self-determined at this point. It's internalized of a achiever and an expectation. So one of the things my mom always used to tell me is, and her father told her this, is you never want to do anything that'll be on the front page of a newspaper, right? And I think that expectation to hold yourself to the best all the time, right? We all fail. We all mess up. We all do stupid things we're embarrassed by. We all, get carried away by things. But you're constantly like self-correcting, improving. And that's definitely ingrained. And there's a lot of high expectations there. I was always working for.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that it can serve you really well in your case. It clearly has. You've, been a high achiever and is somebody that really does know how to converse with and be in relationship with people of all kinds, including people that are much older and incredibly successful or, important politicians or whoever it may be. You have a way that you've taken on, that you learned of how to really just be right there with them. And so it's clearly served you well. But let's go back to the statement you made, which I find to be profound, that you lost, did you say from ninth grade to sophomore year in college, somebody close to you every year? I mean, I've seen people go young and around me in my lifetime, nothing like that in a span of years during really pivotal years. And I know that you said that you kind of got into action through it, but boy, that's really intense. I mean, that had to also be really hard over and over again at that time in life.
Yeah. And it's only recently I've been able to talk about it, to be honest, and like reflect on how it has shaped me, because I think it hurt so deeply. And I had my own battles of depression through high school because of this, but it also shaped a motto of my life, which was to never take something for granted, because I was exposed to so many young people dying too early. And, some of it was from suicide. Some of it was from, one was from a tragic motorcycle accident, another from a fluke hepatitis C. He was at my house on a Friday, was, passed away by the following Saturday. Like these events that you can't make up. And it constantly, like, I remember the first two were really hard. So junior and senior year, it almost like became normalized. So I mean, I'm not trying to make a joke of it, but like you create these like mechanisms to accept the pain. And yeah, you get into some bad habits along the way. But I think the idea that you can't take your life for granted and you only live once. And like, I almost went to the extreme yes, like yes to everything because I could die tomorrow. Like I almost went so extreme of a consumption of experiences and, different set of priorities of what became important to me because of those things. I think I've like balanced out a little bit more. I actually, timing wise, just lost a friend I grew up with last week from a long battle of cancer. And it kind of has triggered these things and reminders again in my life that had been so constantly reminded in me for so many years. And I have had a stretch of, 10, 15 years where that I haven't had that, fortunately. And my close group of friends, I haven't had a loss, but hugely, hugely impactful on my psyche, on my emotional response to loss. And I think what has become a bias for action in times of crisis. Like I remember when I led student government at Ohio State, we had, a shooting on campus. I didn't know the individuals. It was a staff involved shooting, but immediately was like, we need a vigil. We need to bring community together. We need to make sure this is a safe place. And like, I knew that intrinsically, I knew that because I needed that, in times before. And like during the pandemic, like I knew the community needed to come together. During the Virginia Tech shootings, when that happened, we did a huge fundraiser at Ohio State, or the Haiti. Like I've always just known, like when there's death and loss, like we need to be together as a community because I needed that so much.
And it's interesting. I mean, this is exactly kind of, why we take the format that we do in the podcast is because like, you're kind of jumping ahead a bit, but, there is the connecting dots. There is the tragedy put to use. That is, and depends on kind of how woo woo you want to get about it or what your spiritual beliefs are. I have a belief that everything is happening as it's meant to be and in the divine perfection and for our benefit. And so, sadly, you have to go through all these experiences, but as an adult, you do know how to handle some pretty significant levels of tragedy. And so it's kind of hard to ignore, kind of how those two things have happened. Now, I've also really, and this is actually something that I've been learning a lot about during the pandemic in recent months, really learned the concept of spiritual bypass, where, you can kind of jump to the belief or to the skill pretty quick without actually sitting in the tragedy or the emotion long enough to let that really be felt and kind of moved. And so I'm wondering, as we kind of talk again about kind of the psyche and the depression and some of that kind of emotion, did you know or allow yourself to kind of have it, kind of tell me a little bit more about that side?
Well, like I think about, so when Matt and Luke passed, so Luke was my first kiss and he passed away on my 16th birthday from suicide. He was my first kiss in middle school. We'd stayed in touch. He ended up, dating actually one of my, best friends, Lindsay. And in that instance, this would have been the third because Matt, Deontay, Luke. So that was an interesting one for me because I was actually out of town when it happened. And I wasn't we got caught in a hurricane. So I wasn't able to get home to be with my friends, to be a part of it. And I think I had to sit with myself for a week. I remember like being so displaced, not be home, not be comfortable, not get busy, right? Like I wasn't able to like help organize my friends or anything. I had to like sit in that. And I remember that one very distinctly because it was just, I think, a place where I had to, And he was also the first suicide of this series of incidents. And so that one also sat with me in terms of really like putting pressure on myself of what my role was, right? Or what did I not do? And I think everybody kind of goes through that when you experience suicide. Is like you blame yourself because you wish you could have solved the problem. But then you just have this like deep sense of like sorrow, and just a deep, I think, almost like a distrust in the systems that in God. And it's when I started to detract for the first time of the fundamental beliefs of what I was raised in, right? Like it just started to disrupt like the world.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. So, this is a big thing, and I've also kind of gone through it on the distrust, the disbelief in the faith.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit, how were you raised, and, what happens, and kind of where are you today with that piece?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic, which has a lot of connotations to it, right? A lot of guilt complexes and sweep things under the rug and move on and do it in secrecy. And my both sides of my family have been Catholic for generations, and I'm no longer a practicing Catholic. I am spiritual. I would not call myself religious. I think that began when I was in high school. It got further independently defined in college. For me, that the decisions that I was subconsciously and consciously making about my belief system was absolutely rooted in, I think, becoming real with this concept that we live for a short amount of time. And what's my value system about making the most of that time on earth? And like, if I'm thinking about my presence in the world and what I'm here to do, I think I've come to believe that I'm here to make as much good and use my life to make as big of an impact as possible. That to me is not driven by a set of sacraments or commandments or things. It's just an ethical right or wrong belief in service and of legacy and of making my life meaningful and touch people's lives and making a change. And I think that started to like make me an active participant in my choices and not be like the system above is deciding what fate will be, right? Like I'm going to decide what fate is going to be, but I'm spiritual in the belief that we have this like interconnectivity and like humanity exists and like there's a higher power that's creating the systems at play. But like in terms of my subordination to, a weekly religious routine really got, I think, fractured in that kind of thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, I think it's an interesting thing, because you broke out of, and I don't know kind of like how hard that was, but there's a family dynamic there that often, does keep people kind of keeping up with those weekly practices.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of had this life experience, and I think that's kind of what you were saying, is that the experience you were having in life kind of led you to really take on the view that you have. Is that right?
Oh yeah, because I think those life experiences make you, or mine at least, made me have to figure out what got me out of bed every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, why keep going? Like, how is this still happening? Like, right?
Yeah.
I had to create those reasons for myself at a really young age. And I didn't find it in church.
Mm-hmm.
I had to find it in a meaning of today that I think is the legacy of every person that's been in my life that left too soon. Mm-hmm. What they taught me and what I hope I carry on in their honor is that I don't take every day for granted, right? Mm-hmm. And like every day I'm making some type of contribution, but I'm also like embodying their aspirations and dreams and what I can achieve.
Mhm.
So I guess I found a purpose in something else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, kind of beyond the purpose of really living every day,
Mm-hmm.
because you have it and you know that you can't take it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
There also seems like there's other purpose there. There's more purpose there, beyond just maxing the day out. As I hear you talk about being of service and kind of what learn to do in times of tragedy. What is that? Tell me more about kind of like what's the other reason for why you do what you do.
I mean, I think there is an ingrained kind of motivation for me that I want to be in service of others. I want to help others. I want to empower others, or which is juxtaposition between this relentless belief that like my life has to matter. Like I can't not, like this life can't not matter. Like I
Uh-huh.
have it. Like this is special. Like I need to make it matter. And shouldn't we all, right? Like shouldn't we all make our lives matter to a bigger purpose, to a bigger reason of making the world a better place? And so for me, I think it's a combination of that, like not taking things for granted, but then also feeling like, can I help others be better? Can I help others make the most of their lives as well? So, and there's tons of examples where my story ends up like connecting a lot of those dots for myself. And I'm not sure if that's from the models of my parents and the DNA of my parents helping me in that, or it's, this feeling of this is something that I can do, is bring people together. Like I think one of my superpowers is being able to bring a lot of type A people together and like, or bring a lot of people together to mobilize collective action. And I think there's something about that is, I think, really powerful. And maybe it's because I need it. Like I needed that too. Like
Mhm.
I needed people around me. I needed to feel a part of something. I needed that too. I'm not quite sure I have put a pin on exactly why. There's probably many things.
Yeah. Well, it might be all of that and more that still is emerging
Mhm.
and unfolding. Let's go back to you being in high school and this principal tapping you and changing your life.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Mr. Keith Bell. Yeah, probably one of the most transformative figures. That and my music teacher, um, Todd Stoll. So I think Mr. Bell was the first one. So the first death happened my freshman year of high school, shortly into the school year. It was September 12th, I believe. Matt Whitlow passed away. And in from that point on, my freshman year was kind of a hot mess, right? Like that was the first thing. It was just, I got in friends with different friend groups that weren't great for me, and was seeking, relief in unhealthy places and all kinds of stuff. And in that moment, sophomore year, where he like empowered me to take responsibility, I think directed my energy in a really positive place and saved me, I think, from a lot of things. But more importantly, he gave me space to play with my ideas and turn my ideas into action. And two of my strengths, when I'm a big like personality inventory person. So if you've done the Gallup Strengths Finder, my top two are ideation and activator, which is a devilish combination because then when I get an idea, I can't not do it, which is a little bit insane. But the idea that I could start to see a vision of how to improve things gave me a channel and an outlet to be creative, to make a difference. And I think to build on this entrepreneurial part of me that has literally defined everything I've done. And he also gave me space, which I think is really important, to and I would say Todd Stoll similarly, to challenge the systems and the constructs of like why we were doing things the way we were doing. And it was my first like ability to kind of change the rules, and say, well, these rules were built for one outcome and that's not happening. Let's reimagine the outcome, and reimagine the system that's inviting that outcome. And he gave me space, and he like coached me in a really great way. And then I think Mr. Stoll was this big idea man. I remember this one conversation with him. We were going through the annexation of the schools and the separation of the schools. And so they're going to create a third high school. And I remember this to the day. And he was like, why doesn't it just one high school and every school specializes in a subject and we all just go? So you go to math on Mondays in this building, and you go to, science on Tuesdays in this building, and arts in this building. And we create best in class, like teachers and places. And I'm like, nobody's thinking like that, right? Like everyone's so attached to mascots. And at that time, right, those are like the most present things to you, is like your school pride and like high school you go to. And it just completely disrupted that model of we all go to one high school, one building. And I always remember that. And I, have tried to surround myself with thinkers that get me out of the box like that, I think throughout my entire career. And I love that thinking. Like I love imagining how we can disrupt systems and think differently. And so I think the combination of those two led me to create my own major in college, kind of choose my own path. No job I've ever had anybody's ever had before. I created new student organizations at Ohio State that are now legacy traditions and, programs, and very
Talk
few
to me
things.
about that, because I think that's like pretty interesting. I've never heard of anybody create their own major. I've never heard of anyone that created the position, that's never been had before. I mean, that's something pretty unique to you. Mm-hmm. And so tell me kind of like a little bit about that when you start to kind of like, is something you see? Is it like a vision? Is this like an image? Is it language? Like, how do you kind of like get this so clear in your mind that you're like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need to be doing. And then like, not only that, the activator side comes in. It's like, and we're doing it, it's happening, Yeah. I mean, I've seen you work, we'll maybe talk a little bit about kind of what you just did with Can't Stop C-Bus. I've seen you activate things that never existed before. And, it is really powerful. You've got a real gift, but maybe you could kind of explain it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that envisioning part and then making it be is sometimes a lonely place, a very frustrating place, because a lot of times when I do see what's possible, I think, of course, like duh, like that's absolutely where we want to go. But I continuously forget that some people don't see it that way, right? And so I appreciate your framing that this is like a great, gift, but I would say it's also, a challenge and sometimes a barrier in relationships and trust too, that we can unpack because, every strength has its weaknesses. But for me, I think it absolutely began. So one of the other transformational experiences was studying abroad. When I was in college, I went early as a sophomore for half a year and interned in Parliament in England. And then I backpacked, as most do when they get to go abroad. And that was my first and only, frankly, episode of time of 4 or more months outside of Columbus. I've lived here my entire life. And I think that experience gave me the self-determination to just figure it out. And this like explorer mindset and this curiosity, I think really grew. Like it was always been in me, but I don't think it matured it really fast. I didn't go with an Ohio State program. I didn't go with an existing major. I kind of landed in there on my own, knew no one. And it like totally brought out a lot of things. And then simultaneously, the summer before that, I had interned for a company called Lead America, which facilitates leadership programs for high school students in different cities around the country, and people fly in and do those. And I learned that I loved facilitation and this concept of leadership and this concept of thinking about how systems work together. And so simultaneously, I found something that I really liked to do, and I knew was like a core, like foundational skill set to anything that I wanted to do in the future. And then so I had like this sense of independence and self-determination and curiosity and exploration that just kind of like happened at the right time. And then I remember getting back and I was like, oh, and I should also say I was majoring in political science at the time. So if you can imagine that. So I went to Girls State in high school and was on a huge high from that and was like, I'm going to be the first female governor of Ohio. Like, I want to do this. And so I was a political science major, worked at the state house, really thought I was going to do that. And then I went and worked in the parliament, and I learned about the constituent relationship and the respect that the parliament had that didn't even remotely come close to what we were doing in the States. The States is a joke. Like, it's form letters and I'm responding on behalf of people with no context, and it's nothing is ever getting to the elected desk. And here I'm working for an MP who's literally handwriting notes. Like, I just had a whole total belief in a democracy, which changed. Like, oh God, like I can't major in political science. Like, this isn't like I'm not doing what I like. There's a better way.
So does that mean you're not going to be the first female governor?
Probably not. I think we could unpack that too if you want.
Because I wouldn't mind you throwing your hat in the ring, but we could come back to that.
We can come back to that. So I think there was this convergence of like what I thought I wanted wasn't what I wanted anymore. What I thought the system of democracy, which I believe in strongly, I'm very, very patriotic, was like fracturing for the first time, that we might not be as great as we say we are. And I had a newfound passion in this leadership development. And so I came back to Ohio State and I was like, how do I do this? And there wasn't anything for it. But I think I learned, in high school that when there's not a system in place for the outcome that you want, create it. And so I created it. So I had to go through a bunch of bureaucracy and red tape. But now it's actually a minor. Leadership studies is a minor at Ohio State. So I put a task force together, a bunch of my professors, and we were able to credential it as a minor, not a major. But I got the major as an independent study. Anyways, so I guess the moral of the story is I think there was like a convergence of new thought going on in my head, and then like belief systems that I was kind of exposed to and coming of age that made me say, well, I'll just create it. I'll just figure out how to do it.
How much of that is like kind of just seems to be your path and it kind of unfolds and it's just kind of like continuing to go that way for you? And when you now see the opportunities, you're comfortable and you just keep going with it? Or how much of it is really kind of this activation piece where you're like, no, I'm going to make this happen?
There's a lot of making it happen.
Yeah. And I guess, I'm also curious about kind of this thing that I've experienced when you're making it happen and it hasn't been done before. Mm-hmm. It's really tough too. I mean, you said it can be a lonely place. I've experienced that. People are real quick to go, wow, this is great when it's done. But, when you were kind of trying to explain it to them to begin with, they didn't really listen or get behind you. Mm-hmm. It can be tough to be on the front end of that over and over again, especially a young woman in a, important role. How hard has that been for you?
Hard. I mean, I think I've, gotten criticism. I break a lot of eggs along the way. And I think, sometimes you just gotta believe it into being. Sometimes you just have to show people to get them to understand. Like, you can only find so many words to make your vision, like, for people to see it, and sometimes you just have to show them. Like, I remember, great example. So when I graduated college from Ohio State, I didn't have a job, whatever, got with the partnership. We can talk about that too. But then flash mobs, all those things. So when I started at the partnership, one of my things I took to Alex was, I don't think we graduate any ambassadors of Columbus. Like, all of my friends have moved to other cities that they think are cooler. Like, we're never taught that Columbus, like, I was amazed. I've lived here all my life and I had a different experience when I moved into Grandview and downtown. And like, how does the city, I thought the city was small and like, suburban, right? Like, I didn't know there were these other experiences. And so I was able to, because of my roles in leadership at Ohio State, have dinner with Dr. Gee at the time and kind of pitch him my ideas about, I think, we should be producing ambassadors of Columbus as a land grant institution. Like, that's economic development. Like, that's the role of the land grant institution, is produce talent for the state. And we're not delivering on that. And so I had built a lot of trust with Dr. Gee over time. So we pulled together a meeting with my boss, Alex, Dr. Gee, the head of student life and the head of enrollment. And it was supposed to be like 45 minutes. It ended up being 15 minutes that said, hey, Jordan has this idea, go make it possible. Like, help make, students ambassadors. And so we teamed up with a team, and the vision was to create this like pep rally during Welcome Week, like expose people to Columbus on day one. And simultaneously, there's a woman in town who was kind of chipping at people that we need to improve the town gown experience. And when Alex like assigned me, he's like, she's going to do this. She totally dismissed it. She's like, no way. Like, you're essentially dissing her by giving you this junior, fresh out of college person that's going to solve the town gown relationship in the city. Like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And I remember I invited her the day of the event, and it was the biggest compliment I'd ever gotten. So essentially what we ended up being able to pull off is we bussed all 12,000 first-year students after convocation, which is the only thing at Ohio State that we all do as a student together. And so from convocation, every first-year student got on a bus, was transported down to Nationwide Arena, and they got a 1-hour program about Columbus and all the things you can do in Columbus. And it was the first time in the university's history that they've ever had every single student exposed to what Columbus is, ever. And I remember afterwards, she had stepped by, she goes, I would have never expected this. And she's like, was so blown away. But it was that exact thing. Like, if I would have told her what I wanted, I still wasn't the profile that you would have believed that could have done that, right? And I didn't do it alone. I mean, we built a team, and it was like amazing leadership inside the university that kept making it happen. But I think that I have that story time and time again sometimes, like where I say, like, I have a big aspiration, and some people are like, yeah, okay. Like, yeah, and I think I'm convicted to show them, because I believe it's possible, and I believe it's the right thing to do. And I believe I can do it. There's no reason why I can't do it, just as much as the other guy down the street can do it. But I think that doubt definitely has existed. But I think what I've learned is sometimes you just have to show people to get them to believe you. And some people are willing to go on the unknown path and like create new precedent. And some people are just not wired that way. Yeah. And I think if we can accept that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just think if we can accept that, of like where our comforts are, we might be able to work together better sometimes.
Yeah. And the people that kind of get it, you kind of gravitate to, and the ones that don't, you just know you got to show them. I think it's really good advice.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the partnership. and certainly about what you're doing with Smart Columbus. And I do want to touch on Can't Stop C-Bus and anything else of the many things that you're involved in. But tell me a little bit about kind of your journey with the partnership. I got to know you in part through the partnership. I think a lot of people don't really know what the partnership is.
Sure.
There's a lot of kind of misconceptions about the partnership. It's changed over the years quite a bit. Talk to me, tell the audience a little bit about kind of your experience, your role, kind of how your view of the partnership is.
Yeah. So I've been with the partnership for about 9.5 years. And, it started out as like a dream role. I was a senior in college and I did a flash mob that went viral, and I created a small choreography business from that, choreographing flash mobs. It was kind of took the trend wave, if you remember that. So if you've seen the Ohio Union flash mob. Yeah.
I do, and I never knew that was you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I
remember that well.
Yeah, it was one of like such a fun, spontaneous thing. So I created a choreography business and was reproducing flash mobs for a bunch of like cruise ships and different like conventions and stuff. And one of them was Alex. He wanted a flash mob for the partnership holiday party. And so he hired me and my partner at the time, who was a videographer, and we produced not only like a version of the flash mob, but like a 30-minute song and dance production with our improv group in college, and like a very cool thing. And we did all these impersonations of CEOs that we had no idea of the consequence of what we were doing. And it went off very well. And through that, Alex kind of got to know me and my work style. And I think was impressed with, again, this, like, I had a vision of what I wanted to be. Somehow he trusted me and we delivered on it. And so we had kept in touch. I actually graduated without a job. I stayed an intern. I tried to pursue the consulting route, and that just wasn't for me. A few other things. I was working on a leadership program for high school students, which I'm still really involved in today, that we were standing up. So it was keeping me busy. Anyways, I got a call from Alex in the middle of the summer. And he said, "Hey, I'm growing my team and I want you to join." And we essentially kind of shaped a role that fit my skill sets and what I wanted to work on. And then, the rest is history. And the partnership to me is an extremely interesting model that I'm very passionate about, that I think every city should have. And the reason why I think that is because, I grew up in a chamber family. So my mom is a chamber executive, and the chamber models exist to serve business and to advocate for the business health, right? So that economic vitality of business. And there's a very important nuance between the partnership and its role in convening the private sector and what a chamber is. The partnership's motto is to leave your selfish interests at the door and bring your community interests to the table. It's a vehicle focused on community impact and getting businesses to lean in on public-private partnerships and big opportunities and for the community. And the values are very, very different in what the staff does. Both have a place. I'm not saying one model is the right model, but it is distinctly different in that a chamber, right, the staff works as a service to business health, right? In the partnership model, the team works to the community's benefit and brings the private sector strength to make that happen. And I really believe in the power of cities that, if you think of a city as a big business or as a big system, like the private sector has an extremely important role in keeping that business healthy. They're funding our arts. They're funding our initiatives that help us solve poverty and housing. And there isn't a single social issue or community issue that the private sector doesn't have skin in the game in, whether it's through financial investment, physical place, policy, people, and jobs. And so the alignment of the business community in trying to achieve a community good is I think the secret sauce of what communities of the future need, and what mayors need, and what non like we need as residents. We need a business community leaning in, and I think the partnership is the vehicle to get the private sector leaning in. I feel very passionately about that.
Yeah, for the audience who does not know, we're talking about the Columbus Partnership, which is historically made up of 50 to maybe 75 now CEOs, but also it's community leaders from nonprofit, from the universities. It's made up of leaders in the community, and has historically been focused on economic development. It's expanded to really tackle kind of a wider range of issues that are really aimed at the health of a city. And, I had a similar experience in the young adult leadership program when we went to Harvard with our group, and there were groups from cities around the country. Everybody, when they kind of heard about the Columbus Partnership, the case study, kind of unanimously said, when we went on break, come on, tell me the truth. Does that really happen? There's no way that you're billionaires and you're CEOs. Like, they actually put the community first and come together and lock arms, because that just doesn't really exist. And I do think it's been the secret sauce of Columbus, and it has really produced a lot of good. And, it's not perfect. Nothing is, but, it's certainly willing to get better. And, I think Alex Fisher, who we're talking about, is really the kind of fearless leader of that group. And, I've been really energized by kind of how it's started to respond during the pandemic, and, what's happening as it pertains to, the social issues. And there's a lot that you've certainly been involved with, but let's kind of transition out of the partnership. So, you then kind of find yourself and talk about Smart Columbus in your next kind of big gig, and, just kind of how you want to talk about pioneering and something new. I mean, this is all very kind of unique. Maybe you could speak to, Smart.
Yeah, maybe a lot of puzzle pieces will come together. So in 2016, the city applied for the U.S. Smart Cities Challenge. 78 cities, mid-sized cities, applied with a vision for how we'd apply technology in transportation to improve people's lives. Columbus became the sole winner of that challenge and received a set of grant dollars. I was a part of the grant team, and then transitioned to help, stand up the joint venture between the Columbus Partnership and the city, and help kind of operate this from a strategic partnerships perspective, implementing pilots and a collective action agenda, essentially, between the public and private sector on adopting clean tech solutions in transportation. And I think the result of that first chapter was kind of a confidence that our community can be a national and global leader in something, that we can write the playbook for things that have never been done before. We've one of the first countries or first cities in the world to deploy autonomous vehicles against the use cases of, residents, goods, and kind of tourism. We are deploying technologies that have never been proven before. And so we're building a muscle, I think, in this first chapter, that we can do things, we can try things, we get value out of this. What I'm really excited about is kind of our next chapter. So as these grants come to an end, and we effectively deliver on them, which we will, I think the future of how do we reimagine what innovation in the social and community space look like, and how do we bring about a smarter, more sustainable city through new and next solutions, and how do we do that to solve for equity, and to achieve prosperity, and truly achieve prosperity, right? I think what I've learned in this process is so many communities have siloed activities in this space, and the coalescing between public, private, nonprofit, academic, and this facilitation of thinking to really solve problems doesn't really happen. And if it happens in abstract ways and in reports and studies, but never in a actionable, implementable set of projects. And I think we really have an opportunity to build a model here for collective impact and for social change that leverages the expertise of the private sector, is totally aligned with the public sector goals, right? And helping make sure the market is facilitated in an equitable way. Helps disrupt how we think about delivering nonprofit services to appeal to like real resident experiences. And we can do it in a way that we can commercialize it. And I'm just really excited about, I think, the potential of making a digital first city. Like, how do we become a community that has digital experiences that makes things more seamless and easy to access, and a better community to live, not just for those of means, but for those who are the most vulnerable? How do we make life easier for them? How do we make life more convenient, more fair, more connected? And then I think this idea that we can lead on climate out of the Midwest is right for Columbus more than ever. I think we have the right leadership with, utility headquarters here like AEP. I think we have an opportunity to lean into that space in a way that, no Midwest state has done. We have a good track record of it. So I'm excited. All of it is unknown. All of it has never been done before, but I think we have a framework and a strong political commitment that it will be an exciting chapter for Columbus to watch. And I'm excited to take us there.
Yeah, good. And that's what I was going to ask you is kind of, what does the future look like for you? And as much as the kind of first chapter coming to an end, you laid out a vision for the next chapter. Certainly, there's so much need. You've kind of put your whole life experience to work, and you've, found these roles that you can kind of create and really be, a change agent, really be able to, impact this city and so many people's lives. Is that kind of where your heart is go forward? I mean, is that kind of how you see yourself really continuing to put this life to work?
Absolutely. And I think if I can continue to do it in a city I love, even better. I think, how can we bring about this vision of a better future? And I think it's a future that's contemporary, that's bold, that's fair, and just. It sounds like abstract, but I think there's very tactical things we can do. I think that's my activator in me. I'm like ready to go. So I'm not intimidated by the challenge. I'm inspired by it. I think our community can become more leading, cutting edge, and future forward in what we're doing. And I think there's a lot of people like you who are already doing that in your developments, right? Like in the placemaking attributes of Gravity and Gravity 2 and the social impact, work that you're trying to do. Like there's a group of this next generation of leaders, I think, in our community that are ready for this, and they're waiting for this, and they already think it, right? Whether it's Matt Skitland or Doug or you. And I think the more we can create the community fabric to embrace this different thinking and this culture shift, right? That's what I want to be a part of, is this culture shift of this next generation, like Shannon's leadership and, so many exciting big thinkers. I think this is the time for a vehicle like Smart Columbus, and hopefully for me to help.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. And I, really think this is where there is still kind of a free zone frontier, that there is so much opportunity. And to me, it looks like it's like absolutely where we have to be going.
Absolutely.
And yet, there's not enough people in that space. So that means it's just like a wide open space to go make change. And we do need more people to come together who have that vision. I think one of the things that strikes me the most in hearing you kind of describe the Strength Finder and knowing you is it is rare for people to not only have vision, but to be either courageous or confident. Because I don't actually really believe that it's not something people have the ability to do. It's
Agreed.
More about, a experience that you have to gain and learn and then build confidence. And that's, this part where you're actually activating. And so we need a lot of activation. There are a lot of people who have good ideas,
right,
and there are a lot of people who are able to get stuff done. Where we really need to go is bringing those two things together.
Yeah.
And, that's what you've done. And maybe, you want to talk a little bit about Can't Stop CBUS as we wrap up, or anything else you want to make sure we connect on. But I mean, boy, the amount of activation that happened there in a short amount of time and by so many people.
So many people.
That was the beautiful thing. Talk a little bit about that. Explain that for people who don't know.
Well, and I think there's like no better verb. It's exactly what you say, like activation, like Can't Stop Columbus activation platform for the community that happened in direct response to the governor's shutdown of local bars and restaurants. I tweeted out an idea to do a hackathon, which is so funny, right? Like I was like, oh, we should be doing a virtual hackathon, get people together to start, working on solutions. Know that in times of crisis, great ideas, result. And so many people like wanted to help overnight, all of a sudden there was, so many people reaching out. We had an organizer group. And I do think in retrospect, that's a muscle we've built in the, I'm going to say the typical, the Columbus way. Like people know how to work together here. And so the idea that somebody would call and jump in and say, we got to do this together rather than create rival things was just like the norm. That's just what we do here in Columbus. And so instantly, like we built alliances, built team. And from there, the momentum went way beyond any expectation. Nobody just wanted to spend a weekend. People wanted to spend months, working on this thing and being alongside, the front lines and the community through this. And our job then was to try and keep up. I mean, it went from like 100 people on the first day to 1,700 people by, the second week. And our job was to create a platform that could stretch and just facilitate people organizing. So it was all done virtually. I think I've worked with nearly all strangers on this, effort. And we became friends through Zoom. So when we see each other in physical form, it'll be kind of bizarre. But I think this idea that people would brainstorm and call out a problem that they solve, and then people would raise their hand and say, I have this skill set, I can help you, let's ideate, just took off. I mean, we've had more than 52 projects mobilized out of this group, raised over $200,000 directly for local businesses through different, socially distanced programs and events. We've built, one of my favorites, we did a design sprint with homeless youth at Star House and Huck House, and specifically with the caseworkers. And what we realized is the thing that they miss the most and the connection they're missing is a hug. How many of us miss a hug? So this team has worked for months and months and months to develop a medium for virtually hugging in an app. You send a virtual hug, do it simultaneously, and it sends a vibration to that person, like when they're thinking about them. There are so many discrete and macro solutions going on that are completely crowdsourced, and they're activated with people all across the region, people who were living in New York, but were from Columbus and wanted to help and couldn't find a place in that community, found a place in Can't Stop Columbus to lean in, and distributed, 22,000 meals, donated over 14,000 PPE items. We've performed 700 concerts for seniors in social isolation. Now you can, request them for heroes. So, I mean, it's been an incredible effort, and it's still going, which is amazing. I mean, it's 6 months in, and I think we've like totally changed operations like 3 times already. It's really like fast changing, but we're just building the plane as we go, which I love. And now it's a much more intentional, curated set of problems. We're helping Dress for Success think about how to make their suiting experience for women trying to get a new job, how to make it virtual. So how do we make it like a Stitch Fix like model where you can select the clothes and they're delivered to where you are. And we helped Columbus City schools map where students were that were disengaged and understand the digital divide barriers and the disengagement barriers of students, helped them reimagine virtual graduation, developed a whole concept that they ended up implementing with boxes that they like kind of spirit boxes that they delivered to every senior. It's just been an incredible community-wide effort. I mean, your effort was incredible. So you guys in Gravity Uplifts, I mean, what I loved about that project was, well, one, I love the picnicking that happened. I felt like I was in Europe in all of our public parks, right? Like people used our public spaces in such like authentic, necessary ways. And the team captured that effort by creating like art that would live within those public spaces. And I think Columbus, a legacy of this year will be an embrace of public art. And I think it started with that Gravity Uplifts project. And if you look at it now, the art in front of Huntington that has been so treasured by our community through the race riots, like they transitioned it into the medium of the Gravity Uplifts boxes so that the community could keep that. And now you can go into storefronts. And then at Easton, if this new like public art effort is all the same Gravity Uplifts team taking that innovative approach and repurposing it to new means of community healing and positivity and purpose. And it's just amazing. And it's everybody's, which is what I love about it. It's not like one person's thing. It's not one organization's thing. It's everyone's thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, if you were to just kind of have stopped after one of those initiatives, it would have been impressive.
Right.
If you would have said, well, here's what we did. We did this app, virtual hugs. But no, I mean, it was like, hundreds of things and thousands of people and it's still going. And just thank you. I think it's really phenomenal. And really just kind of a great, really highlight an example of kind of how you can really take challenging times and come together and help people and, uplift, it's why we like that name, it's really uplift the community and doing it with the skills that you have and the things that you're passionate about. And that is really, kind of how I hear your entire journey, that you have a passion to help people. You've developed skills. Some of it is through tragedy and really tough learning. And some of it's been through amazing role modeling. But you've kind of arrived where you are and you're using your life to be of purpose and to be of service. And that is exactly the kind of journey that we want to highlight and hopefully will inspire other people to do the same thing. So thank you, Jordan, for sharing your journey and for all the amazing work you're doing. And there's so much to come. And you have to do it in the city you love. You're not allowed to leave now. So as long as I'm here, you need to keep working here. How about that?
Well, thanks, Brett. This was just a wonderful hour spent. I feel very, very fortunate to even just have this conversation. And you don't talk about these things very often in the world today. And it was really special to do it with you. So
wonderful.
Thanks for inviting me and making this happen.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jordan.
Onward and upward. See ya.